Welcome to Front and Center, from political battlefields to cooperative playing fields. Hello, I'm Michael Maxenti. Today, my partner Steve and I are really looking forward to an enlightening conversation, a conversation for possibilities. I first was introduced to our guest's work back in 2011 and have been following his work closely ever since. But I will ask my partner, Steve Berriman, who has known him for many years, to make a more formal but personal introduction to our guest. Steve?
Thank you, Michael, and welcome, Foster. I realize I've known you perhaps maybe 20 years, and I remember being at some event with you when you and Kimberly were first beginning the Thrive venture. It wasn't even called that at the time. And I remember also Thanksgiving, Eve of Thanksgiving 2011, right after the movie had come out, we had dinner at a restaurant in Santa Cruz, and everybody was really excited about this. So I'd like for you, just for our audience, to fill us in on your background a little bit, and then how the Thrive movement came about, and the changes that are being made right now that you announced in your recent fireside chat.
Well, those are three big questions. Well, I'll go about an hour and a half, and then you can jump in.
Okay.
That's fine. I'm just kidding.
I have a mute
Every
thing.
time I see you, I just start chuckling. So you'll have to forgive me here. No, my background, I grew up in the Midwest in Ohio. I was privileged to be born into a really wonderful family, which I learned later on wasn't all that common. And they really supported me in basically whatever I wanted to do that made some common sense, even if they didn't fully understand it. And it also happened to be the Gamble family related to Procter & Gamble. So when I grew into adulthood, I learned, thankfully, that I had inherited some money, not a ton of money. People think I'm a billionaire. This is the sixth generation. It's usually gone by the fifth. So, but I inherited enough that I could choose what I wanted to do with my life. People weren't going to take me seriously if I complained about my job. So I really needed to ask myself at a pretty early age, well, what am I passionate about, and what's the best use of me given what's going on in the world? And that really shaped a lot, because I thought when I was in college that people were waking up to the environmental issues, and that would be handled pretty soon. And, the economy would be sound. And little did I know. And I got passionate about filmmaking in college. I actually started the filmmaking department when I was at Princeton, persuaded them to give me a budget and a room and some cameras. And that was the beginning of the filmmaking department, so I could start making films. And what I really wanted to do was make a film about what's in the way of humanity thriving and what can we do about it. And when I graduated, I told people that's what I was going to do. And I thought, conservatively, it might take 5 years, because I didn't want to just come out with a bunch of problems. I wanted to come out with the solutions commensurate to the problem. Well, 42 years later, I felt actually ready to make the film. And fortunately, that's when I met my dear wife, Kimberly, who is a master filmmaker, writer, editor, producer herself. So the timing was good. Maybe that's what I was actually waiting for. So we made a film. We spent 8 years making the film called Thrive, What on Earth Will It Take? And we honestly didn't know. We would kid ourselves like, okay, we'll put this out, and maybe nobody will respond, and we'll put it in a time capsule, and we'll send it out to another planet, or we'll bury it for a future generation. And it went completely viral. Based on the trailer, the premiere sold out in an hour at 6 a.m. And it just has been going viral ever since. Now it's got over 95 million views and still spreading. So it was tremendously exciting for us to realize that, first of all, maybe we weren't crazy, and secondly, it was really encouraging to realize what a great percentage of humanity is not only ready for challenging truths, they're hungry for them so that they can get informed to create solutions that will actually work. So my path since 2023, when Kimberly and I embarked on this, has been creating Thrive One, and then I've had several internet shows. I've been fortunate to to have Steve on the show as a guest and Michael as a member, actually just on my last show. And then we decided to commit to Thrive 2 because so much had changed in a decade since Thrive 1 that we spent another 2 years. We got a little more efficient over the years, and we made a second film called Thrive 2, This Is What It Takes, because so much had shaped up in terms of what it actually was taking to create solutions in every single sector, and the evidence was already here worldwide. So we made Thrive 2, put that out. We're censored like crazy, but now it's really getting out, and I've continued to have an internet show, especially to talk about what I think is most important and what is missing, even in the realm of solutions. So I'll leave it at that. You're muted, Steve.
You were muted, Steve. That leaves me to ask.
I've never heard you so soft-spoken.
Well, that was a perfect way for him to let me ask this next question. Because what is the next steps? That's what I've been focused on, and you touched on many things there that I'd like to get back to. But what is before we get into what is the next steps, I would like to go back to your focus on what was the best use of your life. To answer the question is, what is in the way of humanity thriving? I so appreciate what you said there, and that you looked at your life and didn't want to just, live a comfortable, easy, fun life, that there was more to our existence than just, self-indulgence, if you will. And that is obviously what drew you to Bobby Kennedy, who has a similar passion. And I think there's a lot. Steve, myself, and I'm fortunate to know, and I recently have gotten to know Andrew Yang, and Andrew actually will fit in that. I'm actually have had the opportunity to have some private time with him, and then be assisting him on a couple of events. And I've really grown fond of him, and he fits right into this. But to the next steps, that's the thing that I've been focused on, is what is the adjacent possible next step? And when you were in your fireside talk, you said that you would now decide to shift gears and to into a new direction. So what I'd like you to do for our audience's sake is to go into and explain to them the basis of the whole concept, or not concept, the understanding that Thrive was bringing forward, that then you worked on for 10 years at Beyond after the release of the movie, that now you then have changed directions from it.
Yeah. Well, you hit it on the head with the phrase, the best use of me, because doing the Thrive movement was the best use of me for a long time, because when I went out into the world looking for what's in the way of humanity thriving, I was completely shocked by the results of my quest, because I thought it would be just, kind of a lack of productivity or creativity or inability to collaborate and sort of. Did not go out looking for a conspiracy to control the world, but unfortunately, that's what I found, and it really depressed me for a long time, and I kept thinking that I'm hoping I'm wrong, but the deeper I looked, and this is like 30 years later. I have absolutely no doubt that that's the main thing in the way of our thriving, that we've created a political structure where psychopaths thrive, where people who have no compunction about lying, cheating, stealing, assassination, fake wars, all of this stuff, where they will naturally rise to the top because they'll say anything to get ahead. And given that the political system, for the most part, is dominated by the private central banking system, which is corrupt to its core. It literally is. They got a few people got the right to counterfeit money. Well, if we're in a monopoly game with a few people who get to create the money, how long are we going to be in the game? Well, okay, here we are. They got that power in 1913 in the U.S. And here we are a little over a century later, we're completely broke. The most in debt organization in the history of the world is the US government. And we're on the brink of a global police state. So, something isn't quite tracking here. And so Kimberly and I set out to wake up as many people as we could to the plot that is afoot, because you can't really be effective in dealing with it until you realize how diabolical it is. And so we wanted to expose it and at the same time share what we saw as viable alternatives in every single sector. So that's what Thrive was about. And when we started, there were, my guess is there were probably a dozen people in the world who were doing what we were doing. You know, there's the David Icke's and Alex Joneses and James Corbett's and people who are out there been doing serious research, and each in their own style, you know, sharing it with the world to try to help people wake up in time. So now here we are 12 years later, and now there are literally millions of effective researchers and truth-seeking, truth-telling podcasters who are doing a great job. Of course, there's a lot of frauds and uninformed people, but there's plenty of really important, good information out there. So for us, it didn't seem like the best use of us just to continue being one of those. We were proud to have helped catalyze that. But now for myself, I needed to say, okay, I just turned 75 years old. I hope I have a lot of healthy time left, but you know, I wake up each morning, do a little organ check and go, phew, okay, we got another one. Here we go.
I can relate to that.
And so I realized that the most important thing that I had been sharing with the world that the least amount of people understood was the need for a universal morality for humanity. And then the natural outcomes, the natural downstream flow from the non-aggression principle, which as far as I've been looking for 30 years, it's the only even serious candidate for a universal morality. And thank goodness, everyone I've ever met all over the world already agrees to it. And, you know, it's tough to get your family to agree on where to go for dinner. So, the fact that all of humanity doesn't want to be violated against their will. The non-aggression principle simply says no one is allowed to initiate force or fraud against anyone else except in true self-defense. It's like, okay, well, I've never met anyone who wanted to be violated against their will. There's some people out there who want to be violated, you know, but they're choosing it. That's a whole different topic. But at least it's not involuntary, and that's the key word. So everything we've done, the punchline to Thrive 1 was the non-aggression principle. The punchline to Thrive 2 and all of the TV programs I've done, all the hundreds of blogs that I've written, the punchline is always revealing that humanity has been without a universal morality. In the beginning, it was whoever had the biggest club and the biggest gang. And then you know, we took a major positive step with religions. They started to have some ethics. And religion has been a great kind of carrier for different systems of ethics. Of course, they didn't all agree with each other. And then they fought wars for centuries where hundreds of millions of people died over, you know, who actually had God's true word. So it had benefit, but it wasn't complete. Then along came the notion of the nation state, and really exciting concepts like separation of church and state and the rule of law and innocent until proven guilty. You know, some profound stuff we take for granted now, but it wasn't always that way. However, you know, there's all these different states, and there's human beings making up these rules. They're not going on natural law for the most part. So then they disagree with each other. Now, just in the 20th century alone, over 250 million people were murdered within their own state boundaries. So that hasn't worked out really well either. It's a great start. And, you know, America as the shining light on the hill, and this, you know, republic, and this notion of people actually being able to vote was a huge positive step coming down in history, from the pharaohs to the kings to the priests to the dictators. And finally, now we've got presidents and premiers and prime ministers and so forth. So a lot of people think, well, we've arrived. We just got to tweak it a little bit and it'll be fine. And what I found in my research is that Martin Luther King was right when he said the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And what I just described as the arc of governing structures is a profound move toward justice. But the key is we're not there yet. Democracy at best is mob rule. And, ask anyone who is the victim of a lynch mob, when you start voting on some things, it can be very dangerous if they're in violation of everyone's inalienable rights. So I spent the last 15 years researching and writing about the non-aggression principle, and how when you apply the non-aggression principle universally, the real shock that blows everybody's brains out of their heads just thinking about it is the natural extension of the non-aggression principle is a stateless society. Because the state, the notion that a few people have the right to rule everyone else, is corrupt at its core. The only way any government survives is through taxation. And taxation is taking somebody else's money against their will. Now, if you did that to your neighbor, it would be obvious theft. But if you hire someone and you convince people that there's some sort of fabrication, a lot of people got together and this is for the good of the group and everything. If you hire someone, call them government, and they go take the other person's money, somehow it's okay. They call it the social contract. Well, I looked through my files and I can't find my contract. I don't remember signing that one. And I think we were duped again. And once again, the emperor has no clothes, but so many people worldwide have been duped by this massive global media and so forth that it's a real challenge now to wake people up to not only do we need to get beyond the notion of government, the same way people fought the end of slavery because who's going to pick the cotton? Our entire economy is based on slavery. We're going to die. But it changed just because it was the right thing to do. It was the moral thing to do. Well, it's the same way with a stateless society. And as when they stopped slavery, then the Industrial Revolution came in and solved all those picking problems very quickly. And the same thing will happen here. In every single sector, there are already whole system alternatives that do way better than government what we think government needed to do. So to finalize that, what I have dedicated the rest of my life to is educating people about how whenever we've gotten close to a stateless society in history, the evidence is that it's really successful in terms of security, prosperity, and happiness. But it's always, the bad guys always come in and take over all that profitability under the guise of some sort of ruler. So the first thing is laying out the evidence for how it has worked. The second one is, okay, if we were in a stateless society and we didn't have any mommy or daddy state ruling over us, well, would it be just chaos and blood in the streets? I was concerned about that when I started in on this research. No, it turns out that the evidence is there that it would work way better. In fact, I've come to the conclusion that it's the only way humanity makes it out of this global tyranny alive. And then the hardest challenge of all, and I'm writing a book about these three things. The third one is, okay, if it makes sense to move to a stateless society, then how in the world do we get from where we are now to that? So that's what I'm working on.
Sounds like
this conversation will hopefully, when we come out of this conversation, we might have some agreement on some possibilities for that adjacent possible next step, one of the next steps, but that we can take. But before I jump into some questions I'd like to get some of the examples of the stateless society from you. Steve, I'm sure you've been chomping at the bit patiently. Please.
No, actually, this has been very interesting. I love the idea of a universal morality for humanity because, in a way, everybody has a big laundry list of what ain't working and what they don't like. And so that's really how we've been programmed and thrown to focus on what we don't want. It's very challenging to get people to focus on what they do want, number one. Number two, you mentioned the term challenging truths. And for many of us over the past 4 years or so, 3 or 4 years since the COVID thing, we've seen a huge breach, at least in my community of awakening people. There are some that are following the mainstream prescriptions. They call it follow the science. It's really follow the money if you follow the science.
Yes.
Enough. And then there's other people who've, we call it the great upwising, where people are waking up and wising up to recognize that we've been hoodwinked by a bunch of winking hoods, and that
Right.
the only way forward is for us to cohere together in one, not around one obviously top-down system, but from a bottom-up realization. I think that's what you're looking to spark. So in the years that you've had this Thrive community running, what did you find the challenges were in getting people, first of all, to wake up, and then once they did, to begin to gear their lives toward making a difference based on that waking up? What are the challenges, and
Yeah.
how do you see us moving forward from that? I would call it a wall of denial that's starting to come down, but it's up there.
Well, it's a very interesting question, because we assumed that our biggest audience in the beginning would be the conspiracy community, or for a better name is the truth movement. And actually, we did some demographics after a few years, and 70% of our network was actually from the consciousness movement. And what the realization that we got from that was that people who have been involved in the consciousness movement tend to know a lot about how to handle their emotions. And when people begin waking up to what's really going on, because it's not good news. The only good news about learning what's really going on is that then you're getting your feet on the ground. And if you're going to run a track race, or you're going to go over to see your neighbor or something like that, you've got to get some traction in order to actually get from A to B. To solve a problem, you need an accurate diagnosis. And so it takes some time. And in the meantime, there's very little incentive for people to wake up to a global domination agenda when they're looking at losing their, some friends, losing their reputation, losing their worldview, when everything begins to shake. But over time, people realize, okay, it's getting worse and worse. That I remember there's a quote that I will never forget from the Swami, where Swami said, "The universe has us surrounded. Might as well surrender." I think it's very accurate. We're surrounded, even by the global domination agenda. We are surrounded. So it's a matter of, what are we surrendering into? It's not giving up. It's surrendering into your true nature, who you really are. When you realize that you are the entire unified field being expressed through a system of toruses called the physical, the emotional, the mental, the spiritual, and so forth, then you can relax a lot about some of the drama that goes on, or, maybe I'm going to die, and all that stuff that paralyzes people, and go, okay, well, given who I really am, now what's the best use of me? So I think that's been the major challenge, is just learning how to communicate to people in such a way that I'm not bombarding them with my own panic, my own fear, anger, whatever, but literally communicating important information in a way that I'm on their team. I'm only going to go as far as they want me to go. And to the degree to which they can have their own emotions rather than having to deal with mine, then there's the space and the time for them to actually come into important realizations. And I'll tell you, I mostly learned that one from Kimberly, because Kimberly was the director on both Thrive 1 and Thrive 2. And when I was narrating Thrive 1, in our set up in Oregon, And we moved into the third chapter, which was the global domination agenda. And I have very passionate feelings about the billions of lives that have been destroyed through this covert agenda. So I'm starting to talk like this. And Kimberly says, well, let's do that take one more time. And maybe a little more gentle. Anyway, finally, she said to me, I want you to come from your confidence about the way out and now just share the information, but leave people space to feel whatever they feel. Well, that next take, I felt like a warm bath had come over me. I really felt connection. I just said what I had to say. And Kimberly said, that's it. Let's take a break. So I came off the set and a large percentage of the crew was in tears. And I realized, okay, something just happened. I just got a firsthand lesson in feminine power. You can't cram this information down anyone's throat. You can't scare them into it. It's a matter of actually connecting and then inviting them to listen as long as it works for them to continue. Otherwise, people need to move at their own pace. So that, I think, has been the major hurdle. We've gotten a little better at it. I still learn, every time I bring up stuff like this at a birthday party or a wedding, and Kimberly kicks me under the table. I was like, oh yeah, that's.
It's interesting, that advice that Kimberly gave you. When we get this done, I'm going to get that and add that into my morning meditation, because part of my, I ask and every day is to give me the ability to control my passion so that others can hear and feel what I'm going to say, and to have that control, because I fight that all the time for similar reasons. When I look at
Michael, I got to interrupt you for just a second, because I'm realizing that between you and Kelly and Foster and Kimberly and me and Trudy, this is how we guys get our kicks.
and we're all blessed, and we're very blessed to have partners in life that have added that feminine, which is one of the things that I've been trying to promote for a long time as well, is that we have to bring the feminine back into the political leadership, because that's one of the biggest reasons we've gotten off track for so long, thousands of years, is that without that balance. And so we're all blessed to have that partner that can bring that balance into our lives.
Yeah, I look forward to meeting Kelly. I know and love Trudy dearly.
Yeah, you will hopefully at some time. One of the things when you said about not good news, one of the things that's so been disappointing to me in our efforts to bring people to the what is that what I believe strongly is part of this the needle that can puncture the stranglehold and control of our political system. Because what I'm about is, how do we get government on the side of the people? How can we make government a facilitator for the kind of evolutionary changes that you eloquently just exposed? And we have to get it out of the control of the leadership of these two parties and the special interests that control them, and to have people's lack of gratitude for the existence they were given and born into, to have enough gratitude to put it in perspective of, to want to give back, to pay forward, as they say now, to future generations. They're all into, not all, most all are into just, self-indulgence on whatever level it pleases them. And that to me has been one of the biggest disappointments I face all the time. And I think what Kimberly said, and the way she said that, it'll help me as well.
Yeah. I had an experience recently. I was invited to do a talk at the Conscious Life Expo a few months ago. And it was one of the most encouraging experiences I've had in a long time, because back in 2012, I think it was, after the Thrive came out, Kimberly and I were invited to do a workshop there, and we pretty much were the rabbit hole at that point. And there was even a prominent New Age leader who backed out of the of speaking at the conference because he didn't want to be associated in any way with the conspiracy net. So here we are, 10 years later, and we were invited to talk in an entire theme called Down the Rabbit Hole. And they had speakers from all over the world. They had an entire auditorium devoted to it. It was standing room only every single time. And for me, it was really heartening because when Kimberly and I set out creating the Thrive movement, one of our main goals was to help facilitate the merger of the consciousness movement with the truth movement, but without compromise on either side, to actually have them meet at a higher level where they realized a true collaboration. And I've been seeing a ton of evidence of it happening. The estimates are that over 1 million progressives have actually left the political spectrum out of their experience of the Thrive movement. And that's really encouraging. But I wasn't ready for, at that conference, which is mostly, I would say, liberals, historically, and there were 14,000 people there. My estimate in talking with other people was probably 80% of them were already on this same page about what's actually going on in the world in terms of nefarious agendas and the need for us to organize and use our consciousness to stay centered while actually solving and transcending these problems. So I said to the group during a panel, I said to the audience, I said, I believe what's happening in this room and in this hotel is a milestone moment for what's happening all over the world, where a critical mass of people are transcending the fake polarity of political rulership and actually coming together on truth and freedom and harmonious collaboration. And I only felt that more and more the more I was at that weekend. And then a couple of people stood up and acknowledged Kimberly and me as some of the grandparents of actually creating the merger of those two movements. And for me, that's one of the most satisfying results that I've ever experienced in my life. And I'm thrilled to see people like you guys who understand a lot what's going on politically, but also understand a lot in terms of consciousness and human nature, looking to create a pathway toward ultimately where nobody's dominating anyone, but realistically, we're going to be in a political world for a while. So how do we handle that? So thanks for taking that on.
Yeah, that's exactly right, is that it's not going to change in our lifetimes, in this existence lifetime. And one of the things that's helped me sometimes in dealing with the realization, you refer to it, and I do as well, more often than I care to, is an agenda, and process theology and help me get a different perspective that it is a part of an evolutionary self-interest, rather than that there are people up there who have this total nefarious, like puppeteers that people want to think of, that it's been more of an evolution of natural self-interest to drive these actions that now continue to compound themselves and move us towards a phrase that you used in the conversation, I think it was with Bobby Kennedy, which was turnkey totalitarianism, is to understand that's, to me, that was what is a really focused phrase to help people realize, is that this slow taking away of our rights and turning it over with the 5G and all of the uses of that, so that it becomes, so you don't even realize that you're in that pin and you've been pinned in and you don't even know it. But it helps.
I'd be happy to comment on that. And I think I'll need to disagree with you somewhat. But first of all, let me set up the Swami here. Swami, is there a key to the universe?
Oh, well, there's bad news and there's good news. The bad news, no key to the universe. Good news, it's been left unlocked.
Yeah.
That's an oldie but goodie, man. That was one of the first
Okay,
things
I'll send you the invoice. And so let me comment a little bit on what you said, Michael, because I've come to, I think, a different understanding. I think that there are truly evil people behind the curtains doing very nefarious agenda, and they have been doing it for centuries. And I've been documenting that for decades. And that's not to say, oh, well, we just happen to have a few psychos in the world. I've also spent years researching the lives of these destructive people. And virtually every time I found a history of childhood abuse. So I don't think psychopaths are born. Maybe there's a past life thing that carries on, but most fundamentally, I think that the human nature that you referred to is a very positive thing. I think the unified field wants us to thrive, and the more we are in love and in harmony with the universe, the healthier we're going to be, the better our relationships are going to be. But there's about 3% in every population, every region of the world that are psychopaths and sociopaths, meaning they truly, with the sociopaths, they don't care what you're experiencing. They don't care about the results of their action on other human beings. They can't even feel it. And with a psychopath, they actually get off on really destroying people's lives and torturing them and so forth. So we need to recognize that these beings exist so that we obsolete them, so we get them some healing, but so that we don't allow them to run the US government, run the central banks, run the World Economic Forum, the CDC, the FDA, and I could go on, because that's the structure that we have allowed to occur in the world. And so how did this kind of bad behavior get started? Yes, through abuse, and that needs healing. You can't always trace back where the abuse started. There are many very smart people who've done a lot of research who basically think that there is an extraterrestrial agenda by several different species to control our behavior, to take over the planet and that type of thing. I don't have an authoritative opinion on that. I've researched it a lot, and it actually makes a lot of sense. I'm open to the possibility of that, but I don't know. And given that we don't know, and we can't relate directly to these extraterrestrial entities, I think what we need to do is deal effectively with the human beings that we know are doing these behaviors as quickly as possible. And that's mostly a matter of recognizing that they're not evil souls, but they've been disconnected by abuse from their soul. So they're doing evil behavior, which in my definition, evil behavior is knowing a violation of the non-aggression principle. When you know that you're violating other people and their property and so forth, that's evil behavior. And so I don't think it's what the term you used was the emergence of a natural self-interest. I think we all have natural self-interest, but I think that that's also balanced and mitigated by the non-aggression principle and by our natural empathy with other human beings. When we see that we've hurt somebody's feelings, we don't like it. When we see that someone is bullying someone else, there's an inclination to try to resolve that issue. Most of the people I've met would give me the shirt off their back in a storm. Really, that's the kind of feeling that I have about humanity. So I think it's critical that we understand that this is a whole different agenda. And I've been documenting it literally since, in my historical research, since the creation of the Illuminati in Germany in exactly the same year as the Declaration of Independence. And no coincidence, the European central bankers and England, the king in particular, realized that they had lost America, and politically and and financially. So they immediately set about to create a global network of secret societies that would regain domination over America and the rest of the world through covert means. And they literally, these are in their documents, which got discovered. And it would be a strategy of pitting what we would now call the left against the right. We call it the communists against the fascists or something, but it could also be the old against the young, the dark skin versus the light skin, this gender versus that gender. And look how that's playing out. This is a very conscious agenda on the part of a global deep state that is beyond any of the so-called political isms. And that people may not understand that, but with that, we've done our best to actually document that, wake people up to it, show them where they can search it on their own, because unless you realize that, it's very difficult to get a foothold in solving the problem.
The depths of the problem that you just laid out, for most people, once they have an understanding of that, they tend to be overwhelmed with it and think it's impossible, and they just back away. I had a nonprofit called Rebellious Truths, where everyone was a millennial. I was the only non-millennial, and we all came together around the movie Thrive. That was one of the first.
Oh,
that
wow.
was one of the things that we in the early formation of it. But after a year or two, for these young people, after they had learned the depths of the problem that we were working with, and we had gotten really involved with David Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States. So we had for 10 years, we were working closely with he and his team. So they really saw the inside workings of the government at that level. And they, after 2.5 years, so they came to me collectively after the election of 2012 and said, we've just got to get on with our lives. They were overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And I said, I understand. And a lot of tears were shed. And when I said goodbye to them all, and I said, but I at my age, I was 62 already at that time, about to turn 63. I said, I've had a life that went beyond my expectations. This is what I'm dedicating the rest of my life to. But I understand. And today I'm working with these incredible young people that are the same millennials 10 years, 12 years later, and now the Gen Z group, because I'm the state volunteer coordinator for the Common Sense Party. And there is an amazing core group of people who will see the depths of the problem, but are still willing to come out there and give it their all every day to work towards a solution. And but most just get overwhelmed. And
I love that you brought that up, Michael, because we ran into that a lot also. And I totally understand, even with our own, children and grandchildren. It's like when you're trying to figure out how to put food on your table, and you've got, 3 little kids running around, and inflation's running rampant and so forth. The notion of taking on a global domination agenda in your spare time is both practically and emotionally overwhelming, just like you're saying. And it's one of the reasons, people have been saying to Kimberly and me in public settings ever since Thrive 1 came out, are you going to leave the country? Are you going to leave California, given that you understand what's going on? And I'm like, no, listen, if someone at my age, with my privileges and my awareness and my global network, if I'm going to run and hide somewhere, who's going to fight this fight? So I'm trying to do as much as I can so that the younger generations can put their minds to things that they absolutely need to take care of, and then also have a thriving world to live in later on with their own grandchildren.
Well, that's where our ranks are. Basically 80% of these young millennials, Gen Z, who see their future ahead, and they're not going to accept that kind of a future. They're willing to fight. And the other 20% are people our age that are in similar situations, most that have dedicated this time to say, hey, I want to pass on to my children and grandchildren opportunities that hopefully will exceed those even that I had. But darn, I'm not going to give up and let this turnkey totalitarianism change the future, not just for my children, but the future generations.
Yeah, well said. Yeah.
That's
Buster, I have a question. You used that term, a universal morality for humanity, and that's really there does need to be a unifying principle. We know what we don't want. We've got laundry lists of that. How do we create a meme, a phrase, a gathering spot that reflects what we recognizing that we really all want the same thing? There's another quote from Martin Luther King, I'm paraphrasing, that says, you know, when those who want peace are as organized as those who want war, we won't have to march for peace anymore. So this is really about coherence. You know, the bad guys have beaucoup coherence, and they've got the money behind all that coherence. And it seems to me that, as you were talking about, bringing together consciousness and truth, because I think that they've been separated, that the consciousness movement, so many years, back in the old days when it was politics, and they'd say, we don't want to go there.
Right.
And I would say, well, look, there has already come here. Start paying attention, right? And so it's heartening that in 10 years, the whole wheat crowd has kind of gotten awakened to a certain extent. But there is that cognitive dissonance where how do you let go of the ground of being that's been established falsely, I would say, by this culture of separation, by this materialist, relentless me versus you culture that wants to divide and conquer. That is a very tough thing to separate oneself from because it's totally immersive. So in this transition, how do we assist people in, how do we create, first of all, a unifying meme that doesn't become a mass formation that dominates over other people, but recognizes that domination itself is the problem?
Well, it's a super powerful inquiry. And, you know, looking over the past few decades for myself, one of the realizations that I came to in very general terms is there's about a third of the people who are awake already to what's really going on. There's about another third of the people who don't want to know, who genuinely, at this point in their lives anyway, will do anything to shut down that conversation. They don't want to know. They sense that they couldn't handle it. But then there's another third that want to know, but have not been sufficiently informed yet. And I've learned to put my attention to them and not bother battling the most stubborn. You know, go for the low-hanging fruit and then have a great time doing it. You know, you've been really one of my guiding lights and mentors in making sure that that you can take very serious topics lightly, because otherwise they're not going to go very deep. And you can see, I mean, the success that you've had and the success that JP Sears is having now, you see the power of satire. You see the power of when you're in the presence of someone who knows what's really going on, isn't shying away from it, but is also enjoying the process of human relations and information. That's just one of the most inspiring things I know. So it's a reminder that we each have our own styles. You know, you with the humor, Michael with, you know, dealing effectively with young people. You know, a lot of what the Thrive movement has been doing. I remember very vividly, we sat down for our first production meeting at the beginning of setting out to do Thrive 1 in Ashland, Oregon. We sat down with a production crew. And the first thing that I said to them is, we're going to be making a movie about really difficult stuff. And so one of my commitments is that it needs to be completely honest and true. And secondly, it needs to be completely wrapped in beauty and infused with beauty. Because if it's conveyed with beauty, people will feel an intrinsic trust in the message, because they know that we're honoring the beauty that is there in nature. So we spent a lot of extra money and a lot of extra time making Thrive as beautiful as we possibly could. And I think that was one of the reasons for its success. And in conveying the message, I told that story about Kimberly directing me. We wanted to make the conveying of the message as deep in the experience of love, the alignment with the field, the alignment with other human beings, souls, as we possibly could. And that's what I'm just encouraging people to do. As you wake up, find your own purpose, find the sector you want to work on, find the topic you want to work on, find the level of engagement. Is it you want to work on meeting immediate needs, or do you want to work at a systemic shift level, or do you want to work at the fundamental worldview level, working on the consciousness shift? Because those three are very different. And people, when they discover that they can choose which one they want to work on, are very relieved. It's solved a lot of activist burnout problems. But once people get the clarity about what they're really up to, then I just encourage them to make it as fun and as beautiful and loving as you can, because you're probably not going to take dietary advice from a really unhealthy looking person. And if you're talking about how to thrive and you're miserable and complaining and whining and feeling helpless, people are just going to move on to door number two.
So very true. So very, very true. And also, Foster, I so appreciate your notion that even people who are on the sociopathic spectrum, possibly because they've been exposed to sociopathic institutions, are capable of transformation. The Swami says, behind every soulless heel is an unhealed soul.
Oh, wow. Oh, that is so perfect. You may have seen, I've done a number of shows with female survivors, surviving victims of MK Ultra satanic ritual abuse as children and even as young adults. And it was one of the most inspiring things that I've ever come across, because people like Kathy O'Brien and Serena Faith Masterson, and there's a new woman I'm working with now from Australia named Judith Richards, and they're all three some of the most enlightened, loving, strong, clear human beings that I've ever met. So they represent the proof that there's no guarantee, but it's a possibility that the human being can recover from the absolute worst evil treatment that you can imagine of any human beings doing to other human beings. And each one of them talked about the turning point moment was when, through the support of others in two cases, and just literally a cosmic flash in the third case, when they had that moment of reconnection with their soul. Because they all acknowledge that the dynamic of MK Ultra mind control is you torture a person, the integrity of their being, such that it separates from its coherence, its integrity, and also separates from its cosmic connection, literally from its soul. And so here, Kathy O'Brien talk about what happened when she felt the connection with her soul again. That's the key to the whole thing. And she actually told me, she said, during the entire, it was like 25 years, I think, that she was in the program. During the entire time, she never dreamt.
Wow.
The dreaming is part of our soul's connection for healing and guidance, in these lower brainwave states. And literally, so they disconnect them from their capacity to dream. And as soon as she regained her sense of wholeness of who she was, she started dreaming, and it was just, on the path of love ever since.
Wow. Are you familiar with the Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl?
Viktor Frankl, yeah.
Frankl. Yeah.
Yes, I am.
First got that book and read it, I don't know, 40 years ago. And I've read it a number of times and shared it with others. That goes to what you just were saying about the most horrific experiences, but it's what you deal with it up here, how you interpret it.
Let me mention one other thing, because I've been thinking a lot, as I was approaching this conversation about the path, the political path, the transition path to what I'm hoping for, a truly free and voluntary society of humanity. And one of the points that I want to make about that, and one of my mentors by his books, a man named Murray Rothbard, was one of the most eloquent and wisest economists of our generation. And he talked a lot about this transition from where we are to ultimately a stateless society. And he said the key is to educate about the non-aggression principle. And then when you're working with people in collaboration, always have the goal in mind, because if you don't have a place that you're going to, then it's like, you sail out of San Francisco Bay, and you're thinking maybe you'll go to Japan or Hawaii or something, but you don't really know, and you don't have any maps or a compass. Well, you're going to be in trouble pretty soon. You're going to be wandering aimlessly, even if your sails are good and your ship holds up. And so I think that really what's been missing along this line of the universal morality is, if we keep that in mind, then we can recognize that we're doing interim steps. I have this fantasy of having an administration made up in the United States, having a presidential administration made up of people like Bobby Kennedy, Ron DeSantis, and Vivek Ramaswamy, along with Ron Johnson and Jim Jordan, just all the actual honest, loving truth seekers who have still been willing to put up with the political games, but they're actually beginning to really gain a voice right now. Imagine if they just blew the whole right-left thing out of the water and came together. And I know this is what you're encouraging to a great extent, is let's come together around common sense. And the most common sense thing that I know of is that individual liberty comes first. We've been duped by the communists and by the socialists and the fascists to think that you need to give up your individuality for the good of the group. And that's led to hundreds of millions of murders and starvation and so forth. So we actually got to get that finally. And instead of panicking and going to the next regime as this fake agenda collapses, we need to actually keep that goal in mind of how do we organize around the non-aggression principle. And this is what I'm writing in my book about now, is what it would look like when you have voluntary education. You go to whatever school really fits the parents and the children's needs, and you have a free market in honest currencies, and you have, if someone wants to put poison on their food and eat it, they're free to do that on their own, but they can't poison other people's food. They can't lie about what's in the food. So you have, organic polyculture farming, and I could go into every sector. The key thing is that the whole system solutions already exist in every sector. So if we can, amongst other things, use the political system while it's still in existence to help transcend the political system, only by keeping that goal in mind and not putting up with violations of the non-aggression principle, then I think that we can move naturally toward our birthright, which is to actually be secure and free. And the last thing I'll say about that is I gave a talk to a group yesterday about how to get from here to there, an international group. And we had laid out a business plan in Thrive One. Now, you can't impose freedom. You can protect it, but you can't impose a stateless society. But in Thrive One, we laid out 3 natural overlapping stages. And the first stage is kind of a Dennis Kucinich-like honoring the best of the liberal progressives, where you use the taxation that we already have. You cut the military budget in half, you get rid of the Federal Reserve, you've instantly got trillions available to fund the transition, not only of the United States, but of the entire world, just with that funding alone. And meanwhile, you take care of those who've been most disadvantaged by the system and are most in need for some period of years. Ultimately, the nanny state's not going to be taking care of you, but there's a transition. So it will naturally lead toward more of a Ron Paul type of honest, conservative, old school, smaller government, protecting the commons and protecting individual rights, no foreign wars of aggression, sound currency. And as that shrinking of government is happening, people are going to be so prosperous and they're going to be so secure that it's going to, when they're going to look at the question of, okay, how much government should we leave? It's going to be a joke, because the notion of a government, the notion of authority over others, that a few people somehow have the divine right to rule or the majority vote or something like that, that's going to get blown out of the water. And people are going to go, look how much more we're thriving just from really shrinking the government. So don't leave the poison, don't leave the cancer in the body politic. Let's get rid of the cancer of authority, get rid of politics altogether, and then actually be in a society of voluntary association with truly free markets and independent competing security and insurance and dispute resolution, but where every organization and every individual is held accountable to the non-aggression principle.
People
Wow.
think a vision like that, which
Yeah.
which I've been referring to since I first got involved with Charles Eisenstein's work, which was just prior to Thrive, actually, was getting turned on to his work, is the more beautiful world. And we've added the word just, the more beautiful and just world that our hearts know is possible. That's been the vision. And I've said for 12 plus years that Charles holds a lantern for humanity to navigate through the fog towards, to the example you gave of with a ship. I've said for years, you can't set sail if you don't have a destination, or you won't know how to tack into the wind and the changing currents. You'll never get there. You have to have a destination in mind, and that is the more beautiful and just world that our hearts know is possible, and which would fit perfectly into the non-aggression principle, where that world would exist together. But
well, I've been, you mentioned Charles Eisenstein, and I think he's a great writer. And he and I have had some online debates years ago because I think we share a lot of values of how we want people to thrive, but our means were very different. And when we were originally debating, he was pretty much a socialist and wanted to take money out of people's bank accounts in order to just redistribute wealth and so forth. And he also really thought I was a conspiracy nut. This was like in the early 20-teens. And I've been delighted to see his honest awakening, because it can be very embarrassing, awakening to what you didn't know when you're a very public figure. And I really admire that he's been very honest about what he called conspiranoia and realizing, okay, there's actually real conspiracy going on here, and we better be aware of it. And also moving beyond some of the socialist and communist principles. And I'm thrilled to see him really dedicating most of his time now to supporting Bobby, because Bobby is very aware of the deep state. He's still a politician. He's still a Democrat, but he doesn't suffer coercion at all. So I'm thrilled to see that. That's the kind of alliance, is what we would have thought of as strange bedfellows, that is emerging in the world right now. And I think it holds great hope.
It does. It does. It is beautiful to see his transition and now working on Bobby's team. It's great. UBI, Universal Basic Income, which Andrew introduced into the conversation in the last presidential debates, that is part of that process. And I encourage people to look at UBI. The transition that you referred to from where we are to goes through a period of having to expand its social policies to give people the time to make life choices, to change from the circumstances that they've moved into or found themselves in, and give them a path out of that. That's where the compassion, the love, and love is the only emotion stronger than hate, and love will conquer all of that. And so
let me address UBI for a minute, because I think it's a really interesting one, because it sounds so good. It's how we're going to take care of people. When I ask most young people what they think socialism is, when they self-identify as socialist, they say, that's when the government finally takes care of everyone. And I said, well, look it up in the dictionary. No, it's actually when the government takes over control of the means of production. So they duped you once again. So the notion of UBI, yes, in transition, if we took tax money that had already been acquired by the government for the military, or to pay this fake interest on the fake Federal Reserve and that type of stuff, then I would say that would be a morally justifiable means of getting some help to the people who are most in need. But universal basic income, fundamentally, as long as it lasts, is taking money from some people to give to others, and you're taking it against the will of the first people. So I've been working a lot on ethical artificial intelligence. And one of the most exciting things to emerge out of that is some people have really taught me that one of the most giant scams in the world right now is covert data acquisition by the big tech companies, because basically for 30, 40 years, their business plan has been to get money from venture capital and the government to create fantastic technology so you can afford to give really convenient stuff really cheap or free to people, and then you scrape all their data without their knowing it and sell it for billions to military, government, big tech, all of that type of stuff. Well, that whistle's starting to get blown right now, and I believe the best way to get people ongoing universal basic income is blow the whistle on this covert data scraping, have people realize that data rights are human rights. People have no right to take your data without informing you and getting your agreement. And that'll be happening over the next few years. And then give people the option to sell whatever part of their data that they want and keep the rest private. And so some of these people have been doing calculations on that. Andrew suggests $1,000 a month. This would give people way more than that, but there wouldn't be any coercion involved. So this would be a technological, moral solution to a kind of a political and social problem. And these are the types of solutions that I think are going to be emerging, where we don't have to sacrifice our morals at all in order to help take care of people.
But to do that, we've got to get government on the side of the people, to be a facilitator to these kinds of discussions and solutions.
Yeah.
And that's what. So the challenge is, how do we get government out of the leadership of control of the leadership that exists and the special interests? And from Ross Perot to all the people over the last many years that I've been working with on this, the realization has finally emerged that the only way is we got to play within the existing rules of the system, to get inside of the system, to change the rules, to bring a spotlight to those and a new level of accountability and change it, because every effort from the outside at best is given nothing more than lip service at best, and it's never succeeded, no matter how many people we elect from the outside, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why the need of a new kind, not just another party, but a new kind of party. The one that will be that needle, it has to be a new kind of party that allows people and acknowledges people's total diversity of beliefs and opinions, and says, as long as you're respectful, inclusive, and responsible, we will help you get elected, and it good people who then can become dependent upon their constituents for their election, not upon the leadership
Right.
and the money. That it flips the script so that it truly is from the voters up, the issues and the importance of those, and representatives who will reflect the needs and concerns of their constituents.
And getting rid of something like corporate personhood is a good example of exactly that. It makes no common sense at all. Yeah. And it's just leading, as everyone knew it would, to massive destruction and bias in the system.
So that's where I hope one of the things that you might be of interest in is how to use some of your time to help get that political solution there, so that it will be able to provide the time and much of the means to facilitate the kind of evolutionary changes that we need before this turnkey totalitarianism has a more opportunity to get more control and ever get implemented to the degree that it is already in some parts of the world.
Well, it's an interesting question, and I welcome your suggestions as to how I could be helpful in regards to that. In general, there are so many people working on tweaking politics and so few people working on getting, Andrew Yang talks about Americans' broken political system, and I totally agree. But the only way to fix it in the long run is to get rid of it, in my opinion. And there's so few people working on that most of my attention is I want to be the lighthouse. I want to be the beacon to keep the goal in mind that we're heading toward. But in the meantime, though I haven't voted in 15 years, I doubt that I will ever vote again. for me, the notion of voting on who's going to be your slave master is just so vile that I don't do it. But I really honor people who are awake and choose to participate in the system for whatever good that will do in transition, because it's absolutely valid as a transition strategy. So I welcome suggestions as to how, with my stand, I can still be helpful. And I guess one way is, like, publicly, I talk in support of people like Bobby Kennedy and Ron DeSantis and Vivek Ramaswamy because of their ethics and their integrity, not because ultimately they represent the political system, but because they're bringing those kinds of ethics into the political system in what I hope is the transition phase.
Yeah. Well, one of the specific things that you can do is do exactly that. Talk about, we need to bring these two parties in, and the rules, in example, in California and every state, they've got, after Ross Perot in particular, they elevated the bars beyond what they think, and so far it's proven that they've been that right. No one's been able to form a new party of any based on any principles other than allowing a few to come into existence based on nothing but staunch orthodoxy, which they knew they could control and would never go anywhere. We're the real threat, because soon as a party like ourselves would come into being in California, those people who want to run for office, who are already elected, if they knew that they could get reelected by doing the right thing, the thing that their constituents want and their hearts and their intelligence tells them is the right thing, they could stand up to the leadership of the parties and the moneyed interests and say, no, I'm not going to do that. And the threat of being kicked out of their job, losing their job, if they don't adhere to leadership, would go away. And soon as that threat is taken away, we believe all those people, most of all of the recently elected people for sure, want to do the right thing. And
I think that's a really important and sound point. And of course, even with that approach, you're depending on honest elections.
But exactly to your point, how do you fix that?
Right.
Can't fix it from the outside. That's why we've realized is you've got to get inside, figure out how to get inside that playing field so that you can actually begin to bring the light and make the changes to those, so that we can bring back a level of integrity to the election process. That's why the beauty of what we're doing is to use the existing system. You have to play within all the existing rules to get inside of it, by giving people that option to stand up, to do the right thing and hold on to their jobs. And that's where a new kind of party like us can do exactly that. That's why we're their worst nightmare, because as soon as we're in a party that can apply those same campaign finance laws and the same advantages that they have from the inside to people that don't have to be under their thumb for control of the money, then we can begin to make these changes.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I admire tremendously anyone who's willing to jump into that briar patch and fight for justice. But I was invited in 2012, before the 2012 election, to run for president by the Libertarian Party and for vice president with Jill Stein with the Green Party. And I said, I'm really honored by the invitation. And it's just not the best use of me. First of all, I would never get elected in this particular political structure, and secondly, I ultimately it's not my calling to be even if I got elected, to be the head of the biggest mafia in human history. But I agree with you. There are good people coming out, and things like your Common Sense Party can shine the light and help them get the support that they need, because I think it's a really important part of the transition strategy.
I'm gonna throw a contextual thing into the mix, because there's an old quote from Breitbart that says that politics is downstream from culture, and that the first thing that has to change is the culture, and that with an understanding. Let's take it 3 steps: a meme, a movement, and a community. The meme would be something related to this unifying principle, related to this universal morality, the prize that everybody has their eye on, as you said, Murray Rothbard suggested many years ago. And so that would be the meme that travels, that captures people's attention, that creates a movement. And this movement is not a movement to dominate, it's a movement to end domination.
Mm-hmm.
When makes it's very hard to get, because we're so infused with this, I got to dominate or else I'm going to be dominated. That's been each political party. I mean, even your friend Ron DeSantis, he wants to impose his morality on the people of Florida. He's banning books in Florida, like the Biden administration is censoring information about COVID. So each side has its morality, quote unquote, that it wants to impose on the other side. I like the definition of morality as a voluntary change for the better, so that we encourage that, and then we create a movement and then a community that actually grows up to make these strategic decisions, so that there's actually a movement of people to hold up these new political structures that are temporarily going to make a change, because that's what's required. You know, that coherence that those forces have been cultivating for, 300 years or so or more. In order to counteract that, there has to be an awakening, a mass awakening of human beings to recognize a common goal, a common intention that is not going to be imposed from the top down.
I love that approach, and it's interesting. You know, I know Andrew Yang, his sense of a platform. He was trying to keep it simple, I know, and it was basically free people, thriving communities, and vibrant democracy. So look in terms of the words, how much we're all on the same page, because free people is the core of what I'm after. Thriving communities, I totally agree, and that's kind of you go from the meme to the movement to the community. As long as that community is not coerced. And then his third one is the only one I really don't agree with, which is the vibrant democracy. You know, the United States of America, they never mentioned democracy in the Constitution. It was supposed to be a republic, and the difference between the republic and the democracy was that the majority vote could never supersede the rights of the individual. Well, that was conveniently dropped out, because if you're trying to rule all the people of the world, then you need to convince them that that either the majority can rule them, or an emergency can rule them, or something gets to supersede their individual rights. So it'll be fun to have strategy and tactics sessions in the future with all of us.
Just a note about the choice of the word democracy versus the democratic republic is to play. It unfortunately is because of the civic ignorance of the general population to try to use a more nuanced, truthful words about a democratic republic. Goes beyond the unfortunate level of education for most people.
Yeah, it's very tricky with language these days. And somebody just sent me an email this morning. They were freaking out because this is a very erudite writer, and he, every time he goes to the dictionary for important words, he realizes, wait a minute, no, that's not what I was taught. And so he gave me a bunch of examples, and actually republic and democracy was one of them. And I said, well, are you conferring with a digital dictionary or an actual book? And he said, well, you're right. I went to the digital sources. He said, I do have my grandfather's Oxford Dictionary. I went and checked with that, and yeah, they're completely different. You know, one of these days we'll look back on the good old days when the definition of a word couldn't be changed by a small unelected cabal.
Yep.
Wow, what a conversation, Foster. Michael, do you have any final questions or anything to add? This has been really rich.
No, only to invite you to consider using some of your influence to help bring the Forward Party and the Common Sense Party to the awareness of people and into fruition. Help us birth these new parties so that we can break through here in California. We believe California is the perfect place because of circumstances and the nature of the people here
Yes.
to be that innovative example of the new kind of political organization that will help us on that next step.
Well, I would be happy to do that. I'm thrilled that you exist. And people are always asking me, okay, what do we do in transition? And the fact that thoughtful people, caring people are willing to take this on in the way that you and Andrew and others are, I really admire, and I will be happy to promote that.
Thank you. Thank you. With that, my cold is getting the better of me, so it's a good time as well to wrap. I'm sure the audience must be getting tired. Steve, you want to say anything last? And Foster, I can't appreciate enough your time. Let me ask one last question.
Yeah.
We'd like to ask, what would be your vision of the more beautiful and just world that your heart knows is possible? Share a vision of that with us.
Well, it's a planet where every individual has the opportunity to thrive, and no one is authorized to encroach on anyone else's person or property. It's a planet of truly voluntary exchange where people can feel happy in their pursuit of happiness, where they can feel secure that that their community has their back, and they can be productive through the unleashing of their natural creativity that would happen as people know that their individual freedom is primary for the entire species on the planet. That it's not being co-opted by some arbitrary version of what a few people claim is more fair than individual freedom. And where in the process of that, we master the experience of love, of ourselves, of one another, and of our environment, and then are welcomed into the cosmic community.
Beautiful. Thank you.
And let me just, if I had to boil that down to one, so my slogan has become these days, after 30 years of research, truth floats and love wins.
Truth floats and love wins. I like that one. That's a great way to end. Thank you so much, Foster, for an amazing conversation that will, I'm sure, will be circulating for a long time.
You're welcome.
Thank
I've really enjoyed it. Thanks for the privilege.
Okay.
Bye.
Well, to say goodbye, if you're watching on YouTube or listening on our audio podcast, please subscribe, please like, and of course, please share with your friends and followers. If you would consider becoming a supporter so Steve and I can continue our work, you can do so by going to frontandcenter.us, or you can search us on Rumble. There you can become a supporter as well. Steve and I would be very appreciative of any support you can give, from political battlefields to cooperative playing fields. It's a long journey to the more beautiful and just world our hearts know is possible. Let us go there together. Thank you.